Okay. Hello, everyone. I barely see you, but do you have fun? It doesn't sound like. Do you have fun? Yeah. Good, good. Glad to hear because I also have fun. After the morning, I already know that I won't be better than team, but at least we all can try, right? So, as I was introduced by Alex, I'm Filip Rakowski. I'm a CTO and co-founder of Vue Storefront. And I'm also a technology council member of Maha Alliance. So first of all, how many of you know Vue Storefront? Raise your hand. Raise your hand higher. Okay, it's not bad. It's not bad. So for those who don't know what Vue Storefront is and what we are doing, we are basically a set of tools for developers to build e-commerce storefronts. So right now we have this wonderful wave of API-first approach, and everyone is giving you API, and you have to deal with it on your own. And we don't like this. So we're basically giving you all the tools to make your storefront very fast without really digging into all these things that you see at this part of the iceberg. And what I really want to emphasize is that it's really so good to be back here. And it's my 5th time at Vuejs Amsterdam, if I remember it right. And I was very privileged because I was speaking on all of the editions, actually, at all of the events except the first one. And I still remember 2018, February 2018, on the first edition of Vuejs Amsterdam, I came here with my boss, Piotr, at that time, and we were showing Vue storefronts to even you. We were so excited. It was our first Vuejs event. We saw Evan, best memories ever. And how many of you have been actually here in 2018? Yeah, there are some people who are here for such a long time. Congrats, congrats. And, obviously, I was thinking a lot about, OK, what I'm going to talk about. What topic would be worthy this amazing stage, this amazing screen, right? And the first thing I wanted to show was a product that we are building in Vue Storefront, amazing open source thing. So, I'm calling our team leader basically a few months ago, and I'm saying I'm super excited. Look, I have this amazing idea. So I will be at Vuejs Amsterdam, and I will do the release then because it fits our roadmap. And I have this wonderful idea. I will do the release in the Apple style. So I will be wearing all black. I will say something like, this is the best product that we ever made. It's going to be lovely. And he said, yeah, I love the idea that there's just one issue. And I was asked, what issue? We won't deliver on January, probably March. At best. And I was like, OK. So I have to look for other topic. And I wrote, yes, that's now this topic, it's not going to work. So I started to think what I'm going to talk about, what topic is worthy this amazing screen. And just a few days later, I had a call with a client. And the client was actually quite pissed off because he said that, hey, we took you because we wanted to improve performance. We had much better Lighthouse score before the migration on Magento. And right now, it's worse. And I'm having this calls quite often. And I will tell you why. Actually, the whole talk is about that. So we explored all the metrics. And what we noticed is that all the metrics are actually higher. But the Lighthouse score is lower. Why? Because they were benchmarking their website a long time ago. And the scoring algorithm for Lighthouse was completely different. And business people, not even business people, most of the people is not even educated what this number is coming from. And this actually gave me an idea for a talk. So as it is, usually with me, I will talk about web performance. But to be more precise in this context, I will talk about measuring performance. And these days, web performance, you hear about this everywhere. It's one of the most important things everyone wants to optimize, especially in the e-commerce industry. But other industries are also noticing that. And, if you want to look at the impact of good performance or bad performance on business, just check this website if you want to convince your boss. Really, it has a lot of great case studies and metrics that are actually proving that, yes, optimizing performance gives great results to the business. So we already know what is the impact of that. But you may not believe me, but just 5 years ago, 2017, just before the first Vuejs Amsterdam, when we were actually writing the first lines of Vue Storefront, it wasn't that obvious. And the topic of front-end performance was basically almost non-existent in that space. If you were a huge company like Facebook, yes, that was actually something that you were doing, Facebook, MySpace, Amazon. But on the average, how many of you optimize performance on your websites in 2017? Yeah, I've selected 10 people, maybe a little bit more. But, you know, like, let's do a throwback. Let's come back to this wonderful time. Because at that time, JavaScript, single-page application frameworks, they were just gaining the traction, a huge traction. But still, angular.js and React, they were already well-established frameworks, gaining in popularity basically every day. Even just released the second major version of Vue.js. I think a few years later, it became one of the most popular frameworks in the world, the third one, actually. By the way, do you recall those logos? Like, do you know what they are? Like, what is the, OK, the one, the furthest to the right is the easiest one. But what is the next one? Who knows? Meteor, good. And another one, this is the tough one. Aurelia.js, and believe me or not, but we're that close to choose Aurelia over Vue for Vue Storefront. So imagine where would we be? Nowhere. So almost no one really cared how fast the websites built with those tools were. Of course, now everyone says, like, putting so much JavaScript on the front end, terrible idea. Everyone knew this from the very beginning, but it wasn't really so obvious at the beginning, because the reason why we're having all those bottlenecks is mostly because of the ecosystem, not the frameworks. So they needed to gain a little bit popularity, they needed to grow. And you know, as long as we're using PCs and laptops as our primary machines to consume the web, no one seemed very concerned. Like CPU, GPU, internet bandwidth, they were growing much faster than the size of the websites. So we're able to put more and more and more. But this all changed when the mobile phones started to become the preferred way of consuming the web. So we are in 2017, and the term mobile first is being forged. So it's not like we are suddenly starting to use websites on the phones, but it is a preferred way. So majority of people is browsing this way. And according to Google research in 2017, it took on average 15.3 seconds to fully load a web page on a mobile phone, on average. Could you imagine staring at your phone for 15 seconds just to load a website, and this is the average time you have to wait? Because I don't. My attention span is around 1 second. So at that time, the awareness about the impact of poor mobile performance on the business, it just started to emerge, thanks to Google. But we are still lacking an easy way to actually quantify it. Then everything changed when Google Lighthouse started gaining popularity. It came here on a white horse. And I remember when it was introduced and really became rapidly adopted in the e-commerce space, following this huge hype on progressive web apps. How many of you even remember progressive web apps? Everyone, good, good. You should also check Project Fugu, it's awesome. So it was in 2018, so the first Vuejs Amsterdam, good memories, right? And everyone was obsessed about progressive web apps, everyone was obsessed about performance, and no one really knew, what was it about. And unfortunately, I think we are more or less at the same stage right now. So we have Lighthouse, and what made it being so widely adopted? And I think it's a simplicity, really. Like, you just run a test, get a number between 1 and 100, and that number tells you how good or how bad your, for example, performance is. And everyone, even those without any technical background, can understand that, right? It's a very simple scale. And I think that's the root of the problem, because the reality is not that simple. And web performance, user experience, they cannot really be quantified this easily. If it would be this easily, we won't see so many terrible websites on the internet. In addition, there is also a lot of nuances around how Lighthouse itself works. And to use it as a reliable source of knowledge, we really have to be aware of all the nuances. And you won't read about those things in the audit results. Actually, you will read about some of them since last year. So if you're using, for example, PageSpeed Insights, it is giving you much more information. But in general, you don't really know where this number is coming from, where the test runs, etc. So I hope this is something you will learn at the end of this talk, or after listening to this talk. So let's start with a simple question, like, what does Google Lighthouse actually measure? And how we can use this information? Because I have a feeling, or maybe even an opinion, that a lot of people doesn't try to answer this question really. Like they just blindly assume, okay, like the score has to be high to be good, and that's all I need to know. Really, like I'm working with a lot of clients, and one of our USPs in Vue Surfing is actually that we really help with performance, not only from the software perspective, but also from the consultancy perspective. So I'm really exposed to like the understanding of people regarding these topics. So as we can read on the website of Lighthouse, the goal of Lighthouse is to measure page quality, and this is very important. And the audit divides the quality into 4 categories: performance, accessibility, best practices, and SEO. It also tells if this is a progressive web app or not. I don't think this is a quality signal, but okay. And all of those combined, they should give you more or less a perspective on the quality of the website. And by that, try to accurately predict real user experience. And try to predict is, I think, a very good formulation, because this audit will not give you any definitive answers. And Google has always promoted this performance score as the most important one. And in the heads of the general audience, when you say Lighthouse score, we mean performance score. And quality page then means page with a high performance score. And don't get me wrong here, I think performance is definitely a major factor influencing page quality. To be honest, if the performance is terrible, most of the users will not even see your optimizations. But the fact is that we've got so obsessed with just one metric that it gives us a very false impression that performance equals user experience. And that's the only thing that matters to the end user. Really, like especially in the e-commerce industry, I see that this being repeated over and over and over. And in the reality, there are many factors influencing user experience, and even the 4 Lighthouse metrics, they can't really quantify it, or they can't really be used to tell, okay, it is good or bad. It is just a quality signal. And, you know, believe me or not, but the best way to actually identify the bottlenecks in your user experience and, you know, optimize them with real-world results is just talking to your customers, understanding how they use your application, and maybe asking them, hey, like, what would you change? And then taking it with a huge grain of salt. But if you want to use the data in your decision-making process, then you have to put it in a context. Because without knowing the context, it's very easy to make bad decisions that logically, they could seem correct. And let me give you an analogy. So body mass index, probably everyone knows this. We learned about this in school. And I think this is a perfect analogy to Google Lighthouse score. So just look at this chart and tell me, like, does 30 BMI means that you're obese? Well, if we look at the chart, we can say with full confidence, yes, right? But when we dig a little bit deeper into the details of how the score should be interpreted, we learn that this scale actually doesn't work exactly for like a very large amount of people, because we have older adults, it's a large amount of people. We have women, this is a significantly large amount of people. We have also muscular individuals, and the interpretation for them is different. But the list doesn't end here. The interpretation for children and adolescents is also different. So it looks like the algorithm works only for non-muscular, middle-aged males, I think. So the initial result, it could really lead you to bad decisions if you don't dig into those specific details. It could get worse. This kind of thinking could really lead to catastrophes. For example, if you look at this chart, we can very quickly jump to the conclusion that we can put an end to horrible things just by banning the worldwide cheese consumption. And I'm telling this in Netherlands. You would be devastated. So we don't want that to happen. So making business decisions made based on a raw number that we don't know where it's coming from, without broader context, it really leads to the bad decisions. But you can make even worse decisions if you have absolutely no idea about how the score is calculated, where does it come from, what is it about. So let's learn what is it about. Let me quickly explain how the Lighthouse scoring is calculated right now, because the scoring is changing, and it is changing quite often. So the Lighthouse score is calculated from a bunch of other metric scores, and each of them has its own weight. And it's actually an important thing when it comes to the optimization of performance, because there are some certain metrics that you should optimize first, because they are perceived as more important. Also, as I mentioned, the algorithm it is changing with each version, and it shouldn't be a surprise. Like Google is learning more and more about what metrics are really impacting user experience, which are important, which are less important, which are more important, and it is changing the algorithm. And the weights of the metrics changes. The metrics themselves are also changing. Like we recently learned about the interaction to next paint, which will probably be a new interactive core web vital, just to give you an example. So this is a very important slide when we are coming back to the story that I said at the beginning of my presentation. Like the scoring is changing. Never look at the score itself. Look at the individual metrics, and even better, look at the results, like the business metrics. Is the revenue growing? Great. So why would you care about performance? So let's dig deeper into understanding where this magical performance score comes from. So we already know half of the truth, and half of the truth is how it's being calculated. But that's not all. It's an algorithm that is running somewhere. So let's learn about the environments. And most people use Chrome DevTools to run their Lighthouse audits. Like, how many of you do this? How many of you is just using Chrome DevTools? Most of you. Now keep your hands up. How many of you is using Lighthouse on incognito mode? You should, because otherwise your browser extensions are affecting this. So yeah, there are multiple external factors that actually influence your DevTools run. So it's the download rendering speed. It depends on a CPU. It depends on your bandwidth. You can apply throttling, but this is still not the same as a regular device. And the developers, we will usually benchmark on like our shiny MacBooks and get amazing results. And then we'll put this on the web and see that most of your users is experiencing this website terrible. I have no idea why. So we can decrease the impact of those external factors by running it in incognito and applying throttling. But again, this is still not the real world scenario, or it is still not even a repeatable scenario. Because running Lighthouse this way locally is not reliable, and if many people in your company will run them on their laptops, all of them will apply throttling, I guarantee you they will all have completely different results. You should always test your website in the same environment, so the results are repeatable. And because they are repeatable, you can actually interpret them correctly, because otherwise it might be something completely different that changed, that influenced the score, something related to the environment. OK, so what alternatives do we have? You can have much more consistent results if you set up Lighthouse CI, for example, as your CI tool. But you can also use something called PageSpeed Insights. How many of you is using PageSpeed Insights? OK, so it's a website made by Google itself. And you can use it to perform quick Lighthouse tests to basically any website. You have a URL bar, you paste it, and it is running the Lighthouse test on Google Data Center instead of a local machine. So this way, everyone, if you run those tests, they will run on more or less same machines. So it usually uses the closest data center that is closest to you. But sometimes you could use another one if the closest one is under heavy load or unavailable for some other reasons. This is why you could get sometimes slightly different results, or sometimes not even slightly different results between runs. So usually like do 2, 3, 4 of them, and then take the average or a median or whatever you think is better. Like this is what Lighthouse CI is actually doing. So even though the PageSpeed Insights score will be much more consistent, it's still far from being an accurate measurement of your user experience, because it will run a mobile Lighthouse test on emulated Motorola Moto G4. And emulated Motorola G4 is like the average mid-range phone. And unless all of your users are using this device, it is not telling you really like how well it is performing. But the good news is, PageSpeed Insights will also tell you how your website is performing on real users' devices. At the top of every audit, we basically see 3 core web vitals. And this is super important because having the 75th percentile is good, which means that it basically has to be green. It will impact your SEO. So if you have 3 of them green, each of them will give you a slight SEO boost. And this is actually the only important part of PageSpeed Insights audit. Like this part above, this is just an indicator of the page quality, but it really tells you nothing about how your users are experiencing your website. Another problem with Lighthouse is the fact that it is just an algorithm. So it gets input, processes input, gives you output. And if we know how it works, we can easily cheat it. And we are developers, so we're good at this, right? And that happens more often than you think. And it's mostly used by people who just know tech very well. You can easily find a lot of articles like this one that are actually showing how to have a perfect Lighthouse score and at the same time have a terrible website with a particular category. And it's equally easy to trick the performance score. You can detect the Lighthouse user agent, because when the Lighthouse is running on your application, it is using a specific user agent, and serve a different version of your website for auditing tools. For example, you can remove all the script tags from your server-side rendered output, and JavaScript is basically usually the bottleneck. So magically, your score is amazing. And well, there are companies out there doing exactly that. So if the score is suspiciously high to your experience, you can dig deep and see if they are doing something like that. And we've seen that not that long ago in my industry, in the e-commerce industry. And I'm usually not shaming my competitors, because this is actually our competitor. But if you're not true to your users, if you are trying to lie to them, I'm all in. So as a side note, things like this wouldn't happen if we wouldn't be so obsessed about this number. It's a nonsense. So after hearing my presentation, you can get the impression that, in my opinion, Lighthouse is terrible. And this is definitely not my point here. I think it's a wonderful tool, really. Like, definitely Lighthouse made the biggest impact when it comes to caring about performance. And the tool is not the problem. Like, the way how we use the tool and the way how we interpret the data is a problem. So first of all, like, keep in mind that performance is a trade-off. So sometimes you have to get rid of a feature. Sometimes you have to get rid of the analytics script. And this is not always the best business decision. So getting 100 is not the end goal. The end goal is getting good performance for your users while keeping the features. And to me, Lighthouse shines the most when we want to quickly compare the versions of our website, because it is giving you immediate results. So, OK, we had previous version, it scored 80. We have new version, it is scoring 90. Yeah, the performance is probably better. So the best way to use Lighthouse is just implementing it in your CI/CD pipelines. And to get a perception of what is a good performance score for you, first of all, like, do some research, look at your competitors with a similar complexity, because as I said, like, this is a trade-off. And look, what is the good performance for them? What is the average performance? If you're above average, then it's probably good. 100 for a block is a must. Like, if you don't have 100 on a block, it means that you're doing something wrong. For the complex e-commerce website, 60 is usually good. I'm running out of time. I will exceed it like 1 minute. So don't use Lighthouse to measure how your users are experiencing your website. Synthetic data will never tell you this. And to understand how your users are experiencing your website, well, you have to get the data from your users. So you don't have to set up any additional monitoring tools. You don't have to do basically anything. The only thing that matters is that your page is crawlable. If your page is crawlable, then something called Chrome User Experience Report is collecting the data from all the websites that you're entering on Chrome and sends this data to be available publicly. And this, what you see here on PageSpeed Insights, is actually from this Chrome User Experience Report. So this accumulation of data gathered from the internet. And you can also do interactive charts. So you can go to the Crux dashboard. You can create reports for your website that are automatically collecting the data from Crux and telling you how it's getting better or worse. Also segmentation to the devices. This is something that you should really look at, because it is telling exactly how your users are experiencing this. There's a small disclaimer, a nuance. This is only collected from Chrome. So I keep saying about this difference between so-called lab data, and that is measured in a specific environment, and this real-world data of your users. And it's important to not optimize for the former, really. And here is why. So if you do a PSI benchmark on a website, here what you can see is that the performance score, like the synthetic one, is pretty good. 81 for the e-commerce, great, right? But let's look above. it is failing all the crawler vitals. And for 2 of them, the experience is terrible. So here we have a very good example, like where optimizing just for the Lighthouse score could lead. Like our users could get a terrible experience. So always optimize for the above. So what would be the key takeaways from this presentation? Well, good Lighthouse score doesn't mean the user experience is good. That's the first thing. The second thing, use Lighthouse to get a general sense of performance of your website. Because, again, it is not giving you real-world information. The third thing, not everything that Lighthouse will identify as a bottleneck is an actual bottleneck. Sometimes you just need more features, sometimes you just need more analytics, and it is a good business decision. And the last thing, Lighthouse score doesn't have to do much with the performance of your users. The Chrome user experience dashboard will tell you this. Well, thank you. I am running a newsletter where I'm actually building this storefront in public and telling a lot about the insights of building a startup. So if you like those topics, you can follow me, follow my newsletter. And if you also want to learn some tips about web performance, I'm posting them pretty often because I'm reading a lot of stuff about that. You can also follow me on Twitter. Thank you so much, and I hope you learned something.